All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this is your first time here, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How is everyone doing? I hope that in this moment that you just hit play to listen, you're doing okay. Here where I am, in lovely Easton, Pennsylvania, spring is slowly beginning to emerge. We did have the solstice day officially, and you can just see the little bit of buds coming in on the trees. But it hasn't happened yet. It feels like things are about to come alive, but it's still kind of windy and too cold to not wear a coat. I don't know how it is where you are, and maybe you're listening to this some other point in time in history, but in the moment that I am recording, it feels like things are going to come alive, but haven't just yet. And that definitely feels true in other ways as well. If you've been around, you know, I very recently, 5-6 months ago, opened a yoga center and have just kind of started getting it going, and this turn of season feels real important. I was talking about that the other week. And I've also just been reaching out to speak with people to find out what are folks doing right now. And it does seem like there's a lot of people out there who are just starting to try to get a new project going or are thinking about starting something new. Is that true in your case? Whoever you are that's listening, are you starting any new projects? If you're a yoga teacher, are you picking up any new classes or dropping any new classes? I mean, where are we at is what I'm saying. And I've been getting lots of different perspectives on that. There does seem to be a bit of a revival feeling, like some returning back to our roots and going back to things that maybe have worked for us in the past, but not in the same way, because now it's many years later and we have new insights, right? So there's a return back to some like fundamental principles and some tried and true protocols, but we have to also be kind of innovating because you can't go back in time. We can't do it like we did in the past because we're not living in the same world. So there's a return back, but also a new, improvisatory spirit because nobody knows what's going on. So in any case, I think my conversation today with Jonathan Sattin is certainly an example of this. Jonathan was on this show many years ago. He was the founder of Triyoga in London. Many of you know Triyoga did get sold over the pandemic. I had Jenny Wilkinson on a few years back. We talked about that some, and we talk about that again some today. But Jonathan's opening a new place called Home in Primrose, which is where Triyoga originally started. So certainly things are coming back around some for him, and it was really fantastic to touch base with him and find out why he would do it and what he's doing. He was full of interesting observations and just a great guy to talk to. So super happy to have had this chance to connect with him, and it's my pleasure to be bringing it to you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you're enjoying this show and you would like to support it, I want to encourage you to become a podcast premium subscriber. You can notice we don't have any ads on this show. We used to. You can go back in the archives and hear them, but we stopped doing ads because it was a drag for me and I really felt like it impacted the show. So the one way that we are able to generate a little revenue for the show to help keep it going and cover costs is through podcast premium subscription. Not only do you become a supporter, but you also get access to the full-length archives, which is a fantastic resource as well. So again, if you enjoy this show and you can afford as little as $5 a month, I want to encourage you to become a podcast premium subscriber. There are also other ways to connect with me if you want to get into some practice, or you want to become part of a discussion group, or you want to do some teacher training. All that stuff, podcast premium and the rest, can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, I think we will just leave it there. I'm going to touch base with you on the other side, as I usually like to do, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Jonathan Sattin. Hello.
Hello.
Jonathan.
How are you?
I'm doing all right, sir. Nice to speak with you.
How are things in Trumpland, as we call it now?
Well, I'm happy to answer that, but let me mention I am recording, and I'd like us to consider ourselves having just begun, okay?
Oh, shoot. Okay.
So let's not say anything we don't want people to hear, but, you know, it's an interesting question. I mean, crazy, you know, but I don't know. I have such mixed feelings about the situation. I'm very skeptical of the whole theater, you know?
Yeah.
I'll
be very careful what I say now.
Probably a good idea. You know, honestly, I have definitely stayed away from like talking about the politics of the day on the show. I mean, I used to do that in the past and I got in all kinds of trouble. And these days I really try to keep this show more focused on other things. You know, I'm not ignoring what's going on in the world, but I'm not trying to get into it. So we can switch gears. Okay. Well, Jonathan, our timing is actually really good because I'm in the middle of recording a series of conversations that are essentially me trying to see if we can do some assessment of like what's going on out there in the yoga world, because everybody's kind of retreated into silos and the world that we knew before the pandemic is no more. So I've been talking to like a lot of different folks, like just individual teachers, as well as people who are like opening maybe even, you know, single room yoga centers again, independently owned yoga centers. I just opened one myself 4 months ago, believe it or not, which I never thought I would do.
How's it going?
So far, so good. You know, we could talk about it, but I guess for me, I'm thinking back to the last time I talked with you. And as is my custom, whenever somebody is a returning guest on the show, I went back and looked when it was that you were last on the show. And I was shocked because it was February of 2018. It's been 7 years since I last spoke to you. And
8 years.
Yeah. It just doesn't even seem like that much time could have gone past since I last sat in that room with you at Triyoga, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I was deeply intrigued to see that you're opening a place in the original Triyoga location. That's pretty amazing.
Intrigued or amused, I think.
Oh, well, I mean, I would say intrigued and sort of encouraged, you know, because there isn't a lot of things going on, you know? So let me, just to sort of get us started, I guess before we get to what's happening now, I do sort of want to go back because I'm kind of curious to hear from you a little bit about what happened. And just like full disclosure, I did have Jenny on 2 years ago in March.
Oh, I know, I heard it.
Oh, you did. So she came on, we talked about mission, and she did talk about what happened with Triyoga. And I guess I'm kind of curious to hear from you what happened. But I guess even before we get to what happened when the pandemic happened, I'm curious in the years leading up to it, like 2018 and 2019.
Yeah.
How were things going? Like, because a lot of folks had already seen a bit of a downturn and felt like there was some writing on the walls with the way things were kind of operating. And I guess I'm curious, if you remember, like what was the state of things for triyoga back in 2018 and 2019 when we met?
Weirdly enough, I think that they were okay. We'd opened our fourth and fifth, we'd opened their fourth and fifth studios in 2017, one in Ealing in West London and one in Shoreditch in East London. And the East London one was going very well, and the West London one, which is slightly further outside the main sort of centre of London, took a bit longer. But as a business, we were sound, we were profitable. I mean, not ridiculously profitable, but we were profitable, and it seemed pretty good actually. We had an amazing set of teachers, and we had an amazing set of guest teachers. The world seemed pretty good. And the irony is that we celebrated our Triyoga's 20th birthday in February 2020 and had a big party. And 3 weeks later, we were closed from the pandemic.
Oh, my Lord. Wow. I mean, for me, it's interesting because I remember when we spoke and I sort of saw Triyoga as a very an interesting example in the sense that the scale of things, like growing the scale of things, you had, like Yoga Works, or I know there was other companies in the UK that are kind of like these, big venture capitalist nationwide chains of yoga centers that happened,
There's only one like that. There's a company called More Yoga, which is sort of low cost, and so on. But other than that, there were no other quote unquote chains in the yoga world in England at that time.
Right. Well, I guess for me, what I thought was so interesting about Triyoga is that it was big. Like you said, you had like 4 locations. I remember Jenny rattling off the numbers. I don't remember what they were, of like how many teachers and how many classes and how many workshops you all had running at any one given moment. And
it was busy, and we had Jenny was my yoga director at the time, and I had a very good team. She was part of a very good team, and I think we had about 840 classes a week across the 5 centres. And don't forget, we also had treatment rooms. We had probably about 14 treatment rooms, and a Pilates studio in a couple of them, and retail and cafes. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. And then we had a workshop program where we probably had about 25 to 35 guest teachers a year.
I remember like the scale of it all seemed like mind-blowing to me, and that it was all kind of functioning and going well is kind of amazing. I guess my next question about that, in terms of what was making that work so well, I imagine some of it was just like decent leases, but I also think the thing that made Triyoga stand out, and it was what stood out to me having come and done workshops there, was that it did still retain a certain kind of personal quality, even in the sense, as I've mentioned before, Jenny came to my class and took me out to lunch and vetted me before I got a gig teaching there, and then you felt like you had like a person you knew who was a contact there. And then I met you, the owner, the first time I went there. It didn't feel like there was like some central booking office that you were working with, even though it was so big.
Yeah, I think having more than one is an interesting thing to do, and I understand there are numbers of benefits of growing those sort of businesses. You have like one head office, one marketing department, one finance director. That will make sense. I think that one of the things we learned from the pandemic was we were very good at certain things and incredibly inefficient at other things. And, you had to stand back and look at what you were doing and see what was working, what wasn't working. You know, when you're really busy, it's easy to just keep going and keep going and keep going, which I think is a lot of what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was interesting when you actually don't have when you've got 5 physical centers that aren't running,
Mm-hmm.
and you're looking at all your staffing levels and, you know, all the stuff that goes into making them work. It's an interesting review forced upon you. And but I think what made it work, I had a really good we had a really good team. Jenny was an excellent yoga director. And we had a very good person in the workshops, I guess workshops. And yeah, I think those are 2 key roles for me. I mean, there are other very good people as well. I think, but running those sort of businesses, you need someone at the top who has very strong management skills. And I probably question mine. I'm not being funny. I probably do question my ability to manage people really well. And probably a lot of people might agree with that. But I sort of felt that you got to keep on, you've got to have a really good team you can't have weaknesses anywhere. And, but I think also the other thing is people really believed in what we were doing. You know, everyone on the team believed in what we were doing.
Yes. And there's maybe like a timing, like I remember you talking about when it started, and you kind of come into it at a certain point, and you're sort of maybe the first or whatever. And, there was sometimes there was sort of like waves that happened. And if you caught the wave early in the sweet spot, then you were the one who kind of had the thing going,
Yeah, but it was sort of interesting when I look back. I mean, you probably have the same when you look back at your quote unquote career. That most of the time you're struggling with, and then you see how you've been guided, whether you like it or not, where things happen, where like we never had a guest teacher program in our original program for triyoga. It didn't exist. And then we found our first guest teacher was John Scott, the Ashtanga teacher. And then suddenly this whole program grew. So there are just things that happen that are probably a blessing. I was going to say the word nice, but it doesn't sound quite right. And I think there are things that happen when you realize actually we're on the right track. You probably don't realize when you're in it. When you look back at it, you realize that you've been sort of guided, protected all the way through.
Very interesting.
Deep, right?
We can come back to where getting guidance and protection. I'm very intrigued by that. I agree with you. I guess I'm curious to know, do you have, well, you said when the pandemic happened, and I'm curious to hear what happened there, but you did a bit of a reassessment. Do you think that, 5 locations is maybe more than you need? Or is there like a sweet spot of how big it got in terms of scale?
Well, the pandemic was a very black and white event in a sense of nothing worked at that point physically. And but the interesting thing is, for example, the centre in Soho in the middle of town, middle of the West End, was our most profitable centre per square foot, and incredibly busy in the middle of town. And when the pandemic when everyone reopened, I don't think the pandemic, financially ended at that point, because all of us had to deal with our own version of economic long COVID, if you know what I mean. It wasn't like suddenly everywhere opened up and all the people came back. It wasn't like that at all.
No.
So I think Soho, which was our most profitable centre pre-COVID, became a problem centre because no one was going back to work in the middle of the West End.
Right.
So you just had to be quite clear about it. And, being emotionally attached to Soho was difficult, because you create this sort of baby and it grows and so on. You have amazing memories there. And we negotiated an exit from Soho with the landlords. But the landlords were going to redevelop it in a couple of years anyway, and took the view that if they are going to redevelop it, the amount of time it would take us to rebuild it sort of commercially with people coming back to work and all that sort of thing, was going to probably take us at least a year and a half. So it didn't make sense. And what we did, and I think Jenny was there still. Yeah, I think what we did is we basically found a way to relocate almost all the teachers who were teaching in Soho to teach at other centres so that they weren't affected by it too badly.
Mm. So you managed to get through the initial lockdown phase. I know you guys did a bunch of stuff online. I remember you guys had online stuff going on.
We did.
And I know that I and a lot of other folks managed to get some assistance money to get us through that initial place. So did you managed to get through just what you had all the locations still, and then you tried to open them back up again? Was that the deal? Do you remember how long it was you guys were closed before you were able to try to open them?
Yeah, I do. Part of the problem with the impacts of COVID was the way it was managed, sort of as a government. And so you were closed initially for 3 months. Then they reopened, right? So the government had a lockdown for 3 months. And then they said, it's all fine, right? And away you go. But it wasn't all fine. They said you can reopen, but with social distancing, right. Which, to give you a sense of that, they said it was 2 meters between mats, each mat. So we measure that out, and to give you an idea, a studio that would take, say, 75 people could take 17 people. Not that you had 17 people, but
Yeah.
So I can't remember your question now.
Well, the question was about how long you managed to kind of keep everything open in the sense of all the locations.
Right. Okay.
So you managed after that first 3 months, you opened up again, but then they did another lockdown, is what you're saying, right?
So you did 3 months. I think it was March to May. Then we were open for a period of time. Then we were closed. I think there were 2 or 3 lumps of it. In total, we were closed for 11 months, but not consecutive.
Oh, fits and starts. Yeah. Oof.
Yeah. Which really helped, obviously.
And, but everybody was so freaked out anyways. I
agree. And the other thing you realize is that we're all, I always felt this, when you have a practice, it's partly a creature of habit, and people who are coming 2 or 3 times a week, they had to find something else to go to. So I'd meet people who were going swimming in the ponds, or they were going walking, or whatever they were doing. And their habit of quote unquote yoga had gone. And I remember thinking our big focus was on getting people to come back. And that was the focus throughout the pandemic, or the sort of the period after the pandemic was trying to get people to come back. And then you realize eventually you got to start looking for new people, because a lot of those people aren't going to come back. They don't want to be in a building anymore. They don't work in town anymore. Or I don't know about where you are, but lots of people moved out of London. Teachers moved out of London. Teachers emigrated. So it was the proverbial almost whole new world that you were dealing with.
Yeah. That is, I think, what we all observed happening, that there was a sort of real huge shift, like you're saying, even in terms of people starting to practice by themselves at home in their living rooms, and the people who enjoy online yoga, continuing to do that and having lots of different resources to practice with lots of different people all over the world.
Yeah.
But I think you're also right in terms of just people's kind of rituals of life, and how they made that one or that yoga class or 2 yoga classes a week part of their life ritual.
Yeah.
And all those rituals got shaken up, and people made new ones. And then the yoga centers opened up. And the report that I've heard from most yoga center owners is basically the numbers were half of what they were when they managed to get back open again, and people started to come back. It was they used to have 25, they only had 12 now, Yeah,
we were probably, Soho was worse than that because people weren't going back to work in the West End. And then I can't really remember the numbers now, but it wasn't great, I can tell you that.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to not feel good to come back and try to reopen and just see that people aren't coming back. That's got to have been hard.
Well, it was, yeah. I think you taught in Camden, didn't you, when you came to Triyoga?
That's where I was, yes.
Yeah. So that used to be a thriving, bustling, busy place. And when we reopened after pandemic, I got all the team to meet at Camden, all the head office team, to spend a lot of their time on those, the cafe tables in Camden to make sure there was life there when people walked in, because otherwise it was like a desert and but not so warm. But it was you'd walk into sort of peace and quiet, which is lovely at one level, but at a because you want to create an environment when people walk in, there's some sort of sense of movement, and it was a bit spooky.
Oh, that actually put a little bit of a heavy feeling in my chest, because I have a very specific memory of when I walked into Camden Triyoga. It had a buzz to it. The cafe was there. There was always people, like lots of shoes.
Yeah.
You always feel like, wow, this place has got so much going on. There's that many people were there. There's like that many sets of shoes in the doorway. You had to find a place to put yours.
Yeah.
And so to kind of see that hollowed out, that would feel heavy.
Yeah, I think it was. And it was, it was intellectually stimulating how to manage through it and how to, rebuild. But it was pretty shocking. I think it was all it's like being in shock when you're dealing with that. And because it's just there in front of you. No, you hadn't done it. It wasn't like reopening. It wasn't like opening a new business, because you had lots of things you could do. This was, I don't know about you in the pandemic, or in the lockdowns. I wondered if I'd ever shake someone's hand again, or give someone a hug again. I know it sounds odd.
No.
Now, I remember that sort of feeling, and that lack of connection and warmth, and people being scared of what they can and cannot do. It was sort of funny. I'd avoided, I hadn't had COVID. And when we reopened, one of the yoga teachers came up and gave me a hug, which was really nice. And the next day I got a message saying, "Oh, just to let you know, I've tested positive."
Oh.
Anyway, I didn't get it, but it was a sort of...
The hug was still worth it.
Yeah, just about, yeah. It was that sort of, it was sort of... Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it's real interesting to hear that, because it seemed like there was a sort of, subtle conglomeration of factors that led to like brick and mortar yoga centers thriving. And, like those chains of yoga centers that we talked about, Yoga Works, which really, I just remember living in New York and Yoga Works coming to New York City and literally buying 4 independent yoga centers, and then having Yoga Works East, West, North, and South in the city, and they were still kind of going strong. And then there was like teachers trying to form a union,
We had the same here.
And but they all of their locations are gone.
Yeah, I think, I don't really know. I know I knew Chuck and Matty from the early time of Yoga Works, who I had utmost respect for. I thought their 2 centers, original centers, were amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost used them as a part of what they did as a template for how the quality of yoga you could offer.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's difficult as you grow these things, unless you're, especially, you want to maintain a quality of teaching and the breadth of teaching. And I think that becomes, it's not formulaic like, other fitness brands where you can sort of, I'll probably be told off for this, but, to me, as an outsider, spinning is spinning. I've probably been told that's wrong, but I think that quality of yoga teaching and the subtleties and nuances of different yoga styles and different teachers, you can't just roll it out. Do you know what I mean? You don't have a template. unless you have something that's very formulaic or fixed. Like when Bikram did Bikram, everyone was taught by him. There was a set sequence. I don't know if the languaging was the same.
Mm-hmm.
So you can maintain, in theory, you can maintain the quality of that because they've all been taught by you, and you decide who teaches and who doesn't. That's more, quote unquote, sustainable if that's the model you want to do. But I think when you're like triyoga, that's a much harder thing to do because these teachers are amazing. You have a really amazing teachers, and you don't have them everywhere. And we had at triyoga, they had a 5-year rule as a base point. You had to be teaching for 5 years before we would even consider you. Then everyone was auditioned. People just didn't walk in and teach at triyoga, they were auditioned. And to maintain that and grow that is challenging. Possible, maybe, but challenging.
I think you're right. It does seem like anytime there's attempted to be sort of like a standardization or like this attempt to find these objective metrics or whatever in yoga, it never really seems to work. That it definitely seems to have to, it's more about relationships and people, and that involves individuals and their uniqueness. And I guess like a more corporate structure sometimes has a harder time allowing for that. Like everything has to be the same for everybody rather than allowing for there to be kind of like a more creative flow to things. But I guess that's why I ask about like the scale of things. It seems much easier to do that with 1 or 2 locations than it does with 4 or 5,
Yeah, I think so. Well, you're more on top of it, aren't you? And well, you are. You're just more on top of it. I mean, if you got 1 or 2, you know what's going on. When you get to 3, 4, and 5, I mean, you'll know some of it, and a lot of it. I think part of it for me was instinctive about what things were working, what wasn't working, and which was probably a cop out. But I think it was partly instinctive about I could sense what wasn't quite right, and so on.
Interesting.
But it's hard.
And that was just like, is that just like, that's, so it isn't necessarily that long-term strategic planning, is you just kind of like feeling into what's going on and kind of shooting from the hip a little more?
No, you got to be careful with that one now.
I'm just curious about the process of like.
I think, for example, when we went to find another building, it wasn't based on demographics. It was based on, like my knowledge of London. Like almost the first 4 of the 5 buildings we had were in areas that I'd either worked in or lived in. So I knew them pretty well, and I sort of had a sense that we would work there. And some people would say to you, well, you need to do your research and all that sort of stuff about the demographics and, well, I don't know, all those other things. And I didn't really do that because I knew the area and I knew the streets, and do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And you have a sense what should work. Triyoga in Primrose Hill, which was the first one. I lived in Primrose Hill. I was looking all over London for the first site, and I lived in Primrose Hill. And the actual site was off a side road off the main high street, which is a no-through. Triyoga is not a sort of, on one side is a railway track which you can't cross, and the other side is a park. So you don't normally go through triyoga, through Primrose Hill. You go by the side of it. So we were down this mews off a side road, off a road. So it's a terrible place at one level to put a yoga center or anything, right? There where you want people to come to. But it worked. So, sort of.
Did you still have that Primrose location in 2018 when I was in Camden?
No. So what happened was in 2012, so Triyoga, I have to stop saying Triyoga opened in February 2000. And so 25 years ago last month. And their first building was in Primrose Hill. And in 2012, the landlords told us they were going to redevelop we were in a courtyard, and they were going to redevelop the courtyard, but they originally told us that we should stay there because we're key tenants. which was very nice of them. Anyway, it didn't quite work out that way, and they decided they wanted us to move out. And Primrose Hill was like our first building, but it was our flagship building in quotes. We had Soho then, and we had Chelsea, but Primrose Hill was the big one, and so we moved out in December 2004. Sorry, Triyoga moved out in December 2014 to Camden.
Right.
And
Gotcha.
And then that building that Triyoga was in, and the whole courtyard was redeveloped by the landlord.
Right. Okay. So now I guess I'm curious to hear about like when things really or when you knew things weren't going to be okay with Triyoga, or when you had to start to entertain what you were going to do, because we know what happened from listening to Jenny. How long after you guys did reopen did you start to have to face like this isn't going to work as it is?
Well, I personally thought we would get through it. I thought that the main thing is to make sure you've budgeted correctly rather than pie in the sky numbers.
Right.
And I had investors at Triyoga who were backing us.
Did you have investors before the pandemic too?
Yeah. We had an original set of investors in 2000, very nice people. And then we got new investors in when Triyoga moved from Primrose Hill to Camden. After that, we got some new investors in. And so I think the pandemic probably spooked a lot of people, understandably. When you have something that's like a shining sort of star and suddenly it's not so good anymore for the moment.
Or when you have a business that's based on like in-person events and then in-person events stop happening altogether.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yes.
So it's like seasonal, it depends on the sun sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think we realized pretty early on that this was not going to be fixed when the government said everyone can go back to work. It wasn't going to be fixed quite like that. Yeah. And we'd worked out some numbers to what we thought we'd need to get through it. And then basically, actually before the pandemic, we'd been approached by this company to buy us. And at that point, I didn't think it made any sense. I wasn't that keen on the other brands. I understood the concept of having one head office, one finance director, and I also understood the concept of, I hate to use the phrase cross-selling, but that, between different, whether it's a spinning studio or bar or whatever, and a yoga studio, if you had one place not physical place where you could go, but one company, whatever it is, where you could choose what you want to do and pay. So at that point, we were doing payments by credits rather than pound signs. Because when we went online, because the online price for a class was different from an in real life one, you had to differentiate them. And the only way to do it practically was people could buy like an online class of 5 credits and an in real life class of 10 credits.
Oh, whoa, that's a wild system. I haven't heard other people do that before.
Oh, yeah. So that was the way to do it. Well, sorry, that was the way we decided to do it. Yeah. And then you could then buy a box. In theory, the idea would be you'd buy 100 credits that you could use 10 at yoga, 10 at Pilates, 10 at, whatever. So you could use that box of credits to go to different places. Anyway, but I didn't really feel comfortable with the overall branding, whether rightly or wrongly. But the guy who was sort of behind that came back to us after the pandemic saying he was still interested and very keen on Triyoga. And, he loved he'd been to Triyoga and loved, what we stood for and the quality and so on. And my main investors were keen to do the deal.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure at that point there was a little bit of cutting losses involved,
Well, yeah. Well, actually, one of the things we realized through the pandemic is we were over staffed in a number of areas. We were very, I'll rephrase that, we were very inefficient, actually.
Hmm.
And
In what ways? What do you think? Because that's what I'm kind of curious about. If we're opening centers now, what are we going to do different? So, in what ways do you feel like the operation might have been inefficient?
oh, that's a dangerous one. I think,
Well, only as much as you feel comfortable to
yeah,
say, you
I just
know?
think as a company we were inefficient, and that was down to me. Ultimately that was down to me. And I think that we could have, I think there are more efficient ways of running centers without impacting the client experience. So you've got to be careful with efficiency. Um,
Yeah,
and
so
I
what does
think
that mean? I'm still more curious to know what that means in terms
that
of
means
like, because you just talked about having the advantage to having a central booking office or what. But earlier, I specifically mentioned that as like where it starts to no longer have the personal touch and no longer feel like it's very good for yoga. So I guess I'm kind of curious, is there a
well, you don't have
point
to,
where like more efficiency means like losing that kind of,
yeah, but that's the dilemma you have to. No, well, actually, I think you can be. I don't. You mustn't lose the client experience. Okay,
right?
so I think actually, a friend of mine used to talk about the difference between efficiency and effectiveness.
Hmm.
So I think it's probably better to say, we need to be more effective in how we run the business, and I think that when you're not as well managed by me as you should be, then certain costs get a bit out of control and so on. And I
Hmm.
think you just have to look at it and say, what do we need to give the best experience? If you were starting again, what would you do differently? And I think it's all actually, when you start something, it's a lot easier to get people on side than when you're 10 years down the road. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
To get people to, as they say, buy into what you're trying to create. If you're there at the beginning, this is a story from the early days of triyoga. After about 6 months, we had a woman there who did feng shui, and she came into the office. And she said, "You're going to continue hemorrhaging money, and you repaint a wall." So I thought, what? True. So
Did you repaint the wall immediately?
this is what I'm going to tell you. So basically, what happened was there was Primrose Hill had a ground floor and a first floor, and the studios, all the yoga studios, were on the first floor. And as we walked up, the wall halfway up the stairs, we'd painted purple. I can't remember why, but we did. And that was the color, tri-yoga color was purple.
Hmm.
So she said, you can't have that purple. As long as you have that purple wall, you'll be hemorrhaging money. I thought, for God's sake. And so I said, what color should it be? She said, white. So I said, right. So I went down to the hardware shop, bought two great cans of paint and some rollers. And when the last class went in at 7 o'clock or 7:30, one of the front of house team and myself, her name was Rachel, got on ladders, right, and painted this wall white. And when the class was finished, people came downstairs and that wall was white. Now, I don't know whether people would do that together anymore.
Right.
I don't know whether, if you say to someone, come out, help me paint the wall, they'll probably look at you like you're a complete lunatic.
Mhm.
But I think if you're there at the beginning, it's more chance of doing it. But maybe, I don't know, but do you know what I mean? I just think that,
I do. I know very much what you mean. My wife painted my yoga center. Like we've touched every inch of the center, every inch of the
yeah,
space, but by
it
our
was
own
nice.
hands.
But it was great that Rachel came and did it with me because it was just an attitude that she said, yeah, let's get it done.
So you're basically attributing all of Tri Yoga's success to the painting of that wall from purple to white.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, so at some point, I remember Jenny talking about it. You did sell Tri Yoga, and
Yeah, I
I
think
imagine
if I
that was a
remember,
hard thing to do as well. Like that was your baby. I remember you talking about it.
yeah, it
Um,
wasn't easy, but I think from my point, I think Jenny had left by then.
she did leave before she mentioned,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that was part of to me having someone like her there was really important.
Yeah.
And I think that working with someone like that who really cares about what you're doing and wants it and understands the principles and so on was really important.
Mhm.
And so I just felt that my responsibility was to ensure the ongoing existence of Tri Yoga And these people were going to come in and invest in triyoga. They believed in who we are and what we did and so on. And they said triyoga will remain its own entity and so on. And I think it made sense. And it wasn't totally comfortable, but you've got all those people depending on you for a job, all the teachers, all the staff, all the people coming to classes or going to treatments. If you don't look after it and those things aren't there, you can't get them back. So it was partly out of that I thought it was the best thing to do.
I completely understand, even on a small scale, when I just had my single room place in Brooklyn, when it came time for me to no longer do it, I did find someone to buy me out of the lease for the same reason, because I wanted to try to keep it going and for people who were teaching there to have a place to teach,
Yeah.
But it should be said that in both instances, in my instance, the person who took it over, she was kind of like horrible and she only lasted less than a year. She didn't even last more than a year. And I know that triyoga is still going. I think I know a teacher or two might still teach there, but it isn't the same. I mean, it's kind of evidence of like just the locations and like a schedule does not make it what it is. There's a soul to a place or something.
Yeah, I think different people have different values, and I can't say too much, but I think just different people have different values, and it came clear to me after probably 3 months. We sold in December 21. And I think by February or March of 22, I realized this was maybe not such a good idea. Well, it was what it was. And I thought probably better to leave.
Now, I know you can't say too much, but my question is, because we're talking a little bit about like what was working and what's not, and you're talking about more efficiency. Was it too much efficiency that you lose the like, you know what I'm saying? Like what's the thing that doesn't make it work?
I think that's a very big question. I think for for triyoga, I think it was nothing to do with efficiencies actually, or effectiveness.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.